This is the production of the skateboard from complete start to complete finish. We're cramming 12 weeks of work flat out for students, and some students don't even finish. We're going to do that in the next 40 minutes. So, are you ready, please? You will need to take notes for your logbooks, okay? Please note for your logbooks there are 3 things you need to do for each entry. You need to do the step-by-step process. Step 1, you place the ruler on the timber lined up with the edge. Step 2, we mark the measurement in. Step 3, squared off, blah, blah, blah. I want the step-by-step process. So you will be writing a lot, so that's why you're told to bring something to type or write on. So, step-by-step process. The next thing you need is anything safety related. So, for example, with the Stanley knife, I'm going to keep my fingers behind the blades. Even if I slip, there is nothing to be done. Okay? If I'm using glue, it's a liquid, it's a chemical technically, even though it's very gentle, I've got to have glasses on my head. And the last thing for your logbook, so we've got step by step, we've got safety, anything interesting. So things interesting would be that we're using PVA glue. PVA stands for polyvinyl acetate, and this one in particular is a very special, specific one to the skateboards. It's called Titebond 3. This is about twice the price of normal PVA glue, but it is a really good quality glue. It doesn't boil in a vacuum because what we're going to do is we are going to use this bag to compress the skateboard. When we compress the skateboard, that is because we're going to suck the air out of the bag and there is more atmospheric pressure around us than in the bag, so the actual atmosphere that you're breathing is going to compress that bag. When you compress stuff, it raises or lowers the boiling temperature. Don't quote me on that, but long story short, under vacuum, a poor quality glue will boil. This is a very good quality glue that does it. It's very, very nice stuff, but it's expensive and yeah, it's good. So now, doing our logbooks. These are some of the things, well, these are the entries for your logbooks. Planning and layout of materials, that is the first entry. That is about nesting. Now, what I mean by that is you're not going to get a sheet of veneer and do one here, one there, one over here, and one right there. You're not just going to do them in random locations. You're going to try and put them in specific ways to maximize the use of your material, okay? That's like Mr. Henderson and I will do it another lesson with you. Basically, we draw out our sheet of material and we work out the most efficient way to lay out our material with the minimum waste possible and the minimum cuts. If you can have 2 pieces side by side, like that, there's only 1 cut separated, you've got 2 pieces. Whereas if you put them apart, 1 cut, 2 cuts to do the same thing. So we try and minimize our cuts to save our time and efforts. So that's a planning and layout and nesting. Next one is measuring and marking veneer. Well, actually, so measuring and marking veneer, we need to do it in a way that is square. So I don't want shapes and triangles. I want perfect rectangles every time. And when we're marking, we're using our ruler very, very accurately, lining up the edge of the ruler with the edge of the veneer. We are marking in pencil only because ink from a pen soaks into the timber and to sand it out is sometimes impossible. So we always mark in pencil, and it's a sharp pencil. Cutting veneer, we are going to use Stanley knives. Stanley knives are very sharp, so there's going to be some safety things you need to write about with your cutting of veneer. I don't want to see anyone bleed. We've had students hurt themselves with Stanley knives before, and we plan to keep it not happening this year. Planing to glue, probably the most important step of the entire job. Once you start gluing, you have a very, very, very limited time before the glue starts going off, and then you have a board like this, very poor quality board, where it delaminates. Okay, the glue did not bond because the glue wasn't all the way to the edge and it started setting before it was done. So you'll notice, which we'll go into more detail later, I've laid out this bench very specifically. I've got my veneers laid out, I've got my glue, I've got my rollers ready, I've got my mesh, my elastic band, my pump, my skateboard that I'm using for a mold. Everything is laid out very neatly and I'm very planned and organised. If you don't do that, this does not work. Okay? Also, when you're doing your gluing, you need to have everything prepped the lesson before. So you come in the start of the next lesson, you lay everything out in the first 3 or 4 minutes and you glue straight away because it is a full lesson from start to finish, out of breath, flat out, very, very busy to get it done in one lesson. So there is a whole logbook entry just on the preparation process. That's how important the preparation is. Then vacuum bag use. Vacuum bag use, the main thing I'll stress with that when we get to it is this vacuum bag has a seal. If it doesn't seal, you can't pull a vacuum, you can't suck the air out. To keep that tape in good condition, we put the paper back on the tape every single time we use it. Stop it as we slide it in, stop getting it dirty. And we're very gentle with the bags. So if you pull them very hard, you can actually split the bags through the joints. The other one's splitting a little bit. So we've got to be really gentle with that. And we slide it in really gently, pump the air out, we're good to go. Then once we've done that, we've got a jigsaw process and safety. How to use the jigsaw on a very weird and like odd shape. Like a flat piece of timber is easy. Clamp it down, walk away. This is curved, so when I start trying to clamp, it's going to move around. So it's very important to clamp that in a very secure way to ensure that we are safe. Keep our fingers out of the way, our foot out of the way, so they get electrocuted or set the fingers. And then last but not least, how to shape the ends. When we're shaping the ends, the edge of the job, we're going to do it in various ways. We're going to be using a plane to do some of the straight edges, and we'll use a spoke shave to do some of the other edges. These are very rough tools that leave a rough finish, in this case because of the shapes. Bulk of the materials removed, and then we can use a random orbital sander and sandpaper to finish it off, make it really smooth and beautiful. Any questions? Yeah. Yes, sir. Sanding equipment. Sanding equipment is a random orbital sander. Okay, we put sandpaper on it. It's a third sheet sander because it's a third of a sheet. So if you get a piece of sandpaper, you fold it in the thirds, put it on here, and then you can sand your job. Okay, it's called a random orbital because the end of this goes orbit, so it goes around circles, but it also goes in a random pattern as well, which stops leaving scratches on your job. Good question. So any other questions? Go time. Okay, so when we're measuring and marking veneers, this is my skateboard I'm reproducing. To reproduce this skateboard, I need to cut veneers. The veneers need to be bigger than the job, so that way when you slide into the vacuum bag, any slight irregularities aren't going to show up on the edge of our job. So we need to cut it oversized. Depending how good you think you are, like if you're a gun, you're really, really good, you can just make this 20 mil bigger. If you're like, I don't feel very confident, I'm not very good at this stuff, some people go to 40 mil bigger. So this deck is a 8-inch deck from memory, so it's 215 millimeters. So 215, I would go like 235, maybe 240. And this is 830 long. Notice I'm bending the ruler slightly because when I put it on straight, it's 820. But when I bend the ruler to conform to the shape, it's actually 830 of material. 820 straight, but when you actually factor in the curve, it is a bit longer. So about 830, so we'll call this one 850. So 850 by 235. So I'm going to come down onto my veneer I've got out. So I'm going to mark out 235 millimeters, and when I do it, I'm marking parallel to the edge. I'm not putting my rule on a crazy angle because it does not work and gives you a parallax error. I come along roughly the length of the skateboard, making sure my ruler is at right angles again, and I mark my 235 millimeters. What I then do is I place my ruler along those two marks, and I mark that line. So 235, what was my length? 850, thank you. So I come along here and I mark 850 millimeters. So from one end, making sure my ruler again is at right angles. 850. Come over here, 850. There we go, and I'll put my ruler here. Now, being a rectangle, how can I tell if this is a true rectangle? What can I measure to make sure it is actually square in a rectangle? You do Pythagoras, that's a really long way to do it. Does anyone know another way? If I measure this diagonal from this corner to here, and it is 880, what should the other diagonal be? 880. So it should be exactly the same. And they were exactly 880 and 880, so I have marked the right rectangle, and each of those angles are right angles. Now, when we're marking up veneers, we need a certain number of veneers. Now, if you're making a double kick or a penny board, we make that 9 layers thick, sorry. So 9 layers thick on a double kick or a penny. If you are doing a long board, such as the big long ones up there, we do that 11 layers thick. Now, both those numbers are odd numbers. The reason they are odd numbers is this. The first layer is a long grain. The second layer is a short grain. The next one is a long grain, short, long, short. Now, what I mean by that is this. Can you see how the lines of this timber are running along the length of the deck? So that's called a long grain. Can you see how these veneers, this grain isn't running along this time, it's running across. See how it's running across there? So your layers need to alternate. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut 5 long grains. So 5 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you're going to cut 4 short grain veneers. So 5 and 4. Now we're going to be a little bit tricky on this skateboard here, just because we can. We're adding a couple of these extra really thin veneers, but they are a different colour. They're a hardwood and they're very dark. I think that's Jarrah. The only reason I'm putting these in is, can you see on this skateboard how there's a red line through the middle and it looks really pretty? that's what I'm doing here. I'm just adding those extra lines, so that way when we finish this deck, there'll be two little brown lines just running through the middle, and it looks really fancy and neat. Do you need these? Not at all. Am I doing it because I can? Yes. So just to re-emphasize that, our veneers are going to go long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short. Now the reason they go long, short, if I get a piece of veneer, sorry sir, get a piece of veneer. So this veneer here, we have the grain running this way. Cool, see that? I can very easy snap that off. So snapping along the grain is incredibly easy, okay? But going across the grain was much, much harder. So the timber is very, very, very strong along its grain, but across its grain, very easy, easy, easy peasy to break. Now, the reason that's important to you, if we had a skateboard just made of long veneers, the skateboard would break in half. You'd stand on it and go crack, no good. If we had a skateboard made of short veneers, first ollie snaps in the middle. But by crisscrossing our grains, we are taking the mechanical strength of each piece and adding them together, and we get a very, very, very strong structure. By themselves, they're weak, but when we crisscross them, they interlock together and create a very, very, very dense, strong, and capable skateboard. Cool. So you can see down here, is this a long or a short grain I marked? Long grain. So how many of these do I need? 5 of them. And if it was a short, how many? 4. But if you're doing a big, long cruiser board, you would do 2 extra ones. Now I've marked out my veneers. The next thing I'm going to do is take a Stanley knife. Probably the most dangerous, or one of the most dangerous parts of the entire job. With our Stanley knife, sometimes you'll need to unlock the blade so you can slide it up. These ones here, you just need to push them up. You want as little blade protruding from the end as possible. If you put out too much, the blade will snap and likely flick up at you and potentially cut you. So as little blade protruding as possible. Check the blade is actually secured. Sometimes they're loose and you need to re-secure them. And check the end is sharp. If the end of the blade is blunt and rounded off, we slide the blade up so just one of these lines on here is protruding. We get some pliers with our safety glasses and we snap that off. And then get a new sharp cutting edge to start. The other thing is we have a blade lock here, so I just do that up righty-tighty, and that just means that when I'm using it, the blade isn't going to come out or go back in while I'm working. Now, when I'm cutting this is the difficult part. I need to hold the ruler in a way that I'm not going to get cut, but I also need to hold the ruler stable. So when I'm cutting, I'm going to put my knee on one end and my hand up here. I'm going to work along here and I'm going to keep moving my hand down. Now you'll notice my hand is behind the blade, so if I do slip, I'm not going to cut myself. But as I get towards the end, you'll see my knees there. So that's when I'll need to change my grip, change my stance. Maybe I'll come from the other direction and I'll modify my stance and grip to ensure that no part of me is in front of the blade. If I'm not in front of the blade, no matter how much I stuff up, I can't get cut. Now, normally when we're cutting with a saw, we need to allow for waste. We don't need to do that today because the blade splits the material. There is no material loss. Well, there's a very small part, but it's so negligible it's not relevant. So I don't need to press too hard. I just place my knife along the blade, place my knife along the ruler, and I cut this. Now, I'm not looking to cut the whole way through. I don't need to cut it because as you saw before, splitting along the grain is quite easy. So I'll pop up on here. Cut that. Now I'm going to cut across the grain. Cutting across the grain is more difficult. It takes a little bit more force to do. So because it takes more force, you're going to put more pressure. And when you're pushing down hard on a knife, that's when you're potentially going to hurt yourself. So this is the more dangerous of the 2 cuts. So what I'm going to do, hand out of the way, knee right out of the way, so if I slip, I'm not going to get myself. And this one, instead of doing it in one pass and just scoring it, this one I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. Now I don't, you'll notice you didn't even hear the concrete when I was doing it. I didn't go the whole way through. I'll show you why in a second. So I'm going to, because I'm finished, I'll loosen off my blade, retract my blade nice and safe, and I'm going to put it back in the box. So that way my teacher can count it back in and we know where all that stuff is. Now, I'm going to place the ruler on the job. And what I'm going to do is, with that scored timber, just pop it up there, simple as that. Place my ruler on the other cut. And it pops apart that simple, okay? Cool, that is my long grain cut there. Any questions on the cutting process? This is probably going to be one of the longest logbook entries you do because you really need to emphasize the safety of cutting and measuring accurately with that one. Any questions? We're good? Cool, so we cut our veneers. We've done cutting veneer, planing to glue. So now we're at the planing to glue stage. First of all, we have our rollers. You could be using the wool rollers or you could be using the foam rollers. Doesn't really matter. The whole point is they soak up the glue and help you disperse the glue all the way to the edge. We have a tray ready that is nice and clean, no dust and rubbish. It's really clean and no junk in there. I have enough glue to get this done. Now you'll often be using a small glue bottle to disperse this. Make sure that glue bottle is full before you start. Obviously I've got a giant bottle, that's enough, but if you've got a small glue bottle, top that up before you start getting ready to glue. I have my veneers. I've laid them out, long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, and in particular I've picked my prettiest outside and my prettiest outside there. So that way I've got the pretty sides out, I'm really maximising the visual effects of my job. So I planned and got my veneers long, short, long, short, long, short. When we're packing our veneers, cutting our veneers, you'll notice some of your short grains do break, okay? Now you can see this one's quite ugly, that's why I put it in the middle of the job, it's got some stains on it. This veneer did break, okay? That is okay, that's no problem, because when we glue it back together, we'll just put it neatly back together like a jigsaw puzzle, and you can see where I'm actually holding it, the break does disappear. So that just goes back together and the glue fills the void and it's good to go. So please don't waste veneer if it does split. What we often do though is we will label them, just say this is veneer piece 5, so I'll put a big 5, 5, and I'll just put a couple lines there. Just to remind me it goes that side up and it goes together in that direction there. So I've got my veneers stacked up, ready to go. I have my skateboard mold ready. This is a big problem because students go, right, I'm ready to glue, they start gluing their job, and they forget to get their mold ready. So please make sure you've got your mold ready because there might be 5 students doing a double kick in one lesson. You can be sneaky and have one board on the bottom of it, one board on the top of it, and put 2 at one time into the vacuum bag. That's a really good way to save time, effort, and pumping, which you'll see later. I have my breather mesh. Now, if you don't have the breather mesh, our valve will suction onto the skateboard and it'll just provide a vacuum onto the skateboard. By having the breather mesh, it can't get stuck onto the board and it can suck air from the whole way along the skateboard. So the breather mesh is very important. Last but not least, we have a couple elastic bands. I've only got one because these will perish. I don't want to stretch it too much because this one will also break. But the elastic bands go one at either end just to hold the breather mesh in place, the deck in place, the job's in place. That way you don't do something silly like that. So you've got a breather mesh, elastic band. Last but not least, I've got a vacuum bag. It's in good condition. I've checked the seals in good condition. I've checked the edges are in good condition. It has a valve cap on it. The valve caps are often dropped by students, so please make sure you still have your valve cap. There's no obvious splits in the bag. There isn't like a giant hole in the middle of it. It's in good condition. And before we started, Mr. Henderson and I put the bag in here and we sucked the air out and we just checked that it wasn't stretching back apart and there wasn't a vacuum leak. Doesn't mean there won't be a vacuum leak, but you just want to check that first because once the glue's going off, you don't have much time. Woo. Cool, so now we're ready to start gluing. So I'm just going to tidy up my space so I have lots of room to glue. Last but not least, if you're messy with your glue, we have baking paper pre-cut in the cupboard. If you're messy with your glue, we sometimes will put a layer of baking paper between the job and the mold just to stop them gluing together. But most students are actually really neat and careful and delicate in how they glue, and the baking paper isn't actually required. So I'm pretty good at this, so I think I'm good. Now I've given this glue a really good shake for about 10 minutes or so. I'm going to decant the glue into my tray. Only use enough that you need. It's better to pull a bit more out than to try and put it back in the bottle. Okay, so we've got our rollers. Now, I've specifically worn one of my old school shirts today and one of my old shorts. You don't have that luxury. Most of your school uniforms are quite expensive. So we have aprons in the cupboard over there. It's very important you do get an apron on because you get a bit of glue on you and it sets for good. It is not coming off. Now, I will not roll this layer. Why not? It's a top and I'll glue it to my skateboard. So I'll flip it over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my glue, get some glue on my roller. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling the glue out of the tray and then rolling it back in. That gets me a nice even coat on my roller, but without excess glue. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to roll my glue. If you have too much glue, the glue pools and does 2 things. 1, it crystallizes, and 2, it can boil under vacuum. Both of those things are really bad. So if I just do the wrong thing here, so if I got like a big chunk of glue there, that glue will either crystallize and not glue, or it will boil and it's just stuffed. So it's very important you roll out your glue so you have a nice even coverage. Now the other thing I'm looking for is, there was a little bit of rubbish in that, maybe it was on the roller, doesn't matter. I need to make sure I get rid of that so I've got one uniform coat free of imperfections. So I'm rolling the glue on. Now it's a bit hard for you to see, but I'm getting all the way to the edge. I mean right to the edge to the point where I'm actually rolling the bench ever so slow, like probably 1 or 2 mil over onto the bench. That's why we have these benches, so you can get a little bit of glue on it, it's not the end of the world. But I'm getting all the way to the edge. Now you'll notice, because this timber has been dried for several years, down to about 7% moisture, once I start putting liquid on there, especially these thin veneers, it starts curling up and cupping, so you need to be quick. And when you put them down, you need to make sure they're lined up. So first layer's done. And now roll my second layer. Now I'm doing the second layer out here, so that way if I roll a bit of glue over, I'm not getting it all over the desk, I'm getting over to the next job. But I do need to be careful not to roll it over the gap and crack my veneers. Someone want to give me a roll? Anyone want to help? Someone? Go on, yeah, you got this, buddy. I believe in you. So as I'm rolling, I'm seeing I've got a good coat of glue here. You see I've got a good coat of glue here, but I'm quite light on. There's even a part I have missed. So I'm just going to re-roll over that. Okay, I'll just lift this one up. So I'm gluing both sides of each piece to ensure... I just need you to see up, thanks. I've rolled this side, and I'm going to put this side down. You'll see how that's now cupping. It's very important that I put that on neat, flat, lined up. There we go. So Yaya's going to start rolling that one. Yep, so you hold it down and roll it. Yep, so put the roller in. So pull some glue back up onto the track. So pull it up. It's easy to laugh when you're sitting on your butt not helping. That's it. There you go. So now start rolling onto here. Yep. Go, so start rolling it. Watch I get a shirt. There we go. So now let's do this next one. Okay, go at the other end. Okay, can someone please get the glue bottle out and top me up? You'll see we've used quite a fair amount of glue there. On the ground down there. So roll up there. Now, a couple of little things. So when we do our veneers, we go long, short, long, short, long, short. However, when we add these little decorative layers in, they don't have much strength. They do add a little bit. So we don't worry about alternating the veneers. We go long, short, and then when we include these in, we just keep going. So technically this goes long, short, but we don't count this as a layer. So Yaya's getting the glue on, which is really good, but he just needs to go a little bit more towards the edge. So that way we get even coats all the way to the edge. Otherwise, on the demo one I showed you before, you get a little bit of delamination. So we've got a good coat on here. We bring it over, we're making sure that all the edges line up. So can I get that glue topped up again? Yep, does chew up a lot of glue, and that glue is expensive. That's like a $200 bottle of glue.
Alexa, when you finish, just leave it.
Start on the next one. So I'm just making sure I get all the way to the edge. Yep, so on here, roll this one. Now, just then I rushed and I did something naughty. I dipped my roller in and I didn't spread the glue out on the tray. When I put on the job, it was like thick glue, no glue, thick glue, no glue. I then had to work really hard to spread that out to ensure I didn't have any of those thick spots, or then alternatively a bit that is not glued. Because we're crisscrossing our grains, if there is a bit that is not glued, you have no mechanical strength there and your deck will break there. Okay? Now, professional skateboards like this one, I think this is a Powell deck from memory, if I'm wrong. Good quality decks will often be made with, I've forgotten the veneer. It is what timber? I can't think of the timber. It's Can someone Google that? I can't remember. It's skateboard veneer. Starts with them. Starts with them. It is not Moranti, not Mervo. It is maple. Canadian maple. So normally skateboards are made out of Canadian maple. And the reason they make them out of Canadian maple is very, very strong compared to its weight. Okay? It's not really strong, it's not the strongest timber. It's like titanium. It's not the strongest metal. But compared to its weight, it is very, very strong. So Canadian maple is normally stuff we use. However, Canadian maple, one, it's from Canada, so we'd have to get it here on a boat, which is not good for our planet to be burning fossil fuels to transport the stuff over. But also it's expensive to get here. And also, So that's why we do these ones out of pine. Okay, so these do not come from a veneer tree, these come from a pine tree. A pine tree, those trees out there with the thin needle-like leaves, they look like a Christmas tree. It's a softwood, and because it's a softwood, it means it grows very quickly. From a seedling to fully mature, ready to harvest. Seedling ready to harvest is about 30 years, which makes it quick and easy to grow. Can I get a glue top up, please? Now, on that topic, so very expensive skateboards are made out of Canadian maple. We are making these out of pine, which means they're still quite strong. We're using all the correct techniques. We are just using a slightly inferior veneer. But that means that these are for demonstration purposes only. When you take these home, these are for wall art only. If you choose to ride it, you do so at your own risk, and we do not recommend that at all. They are for demonstration purposes only, so you're learning the technique. But this here is how a lot of small-scale skateboards are made, exactly like this. They'll have slightly more advanced machines. Instead of using a hand pump, they'll use a vacuum pump to provide their vacuum. A couple of slightly different things. So they'll have slightly different roles for glue application. Start the next one. Doing a good job, yeah.
So is there a difference with the brush you use or no?
Sorry, I just can't hear a couple of people. Can I get you nice and quiet, thanks? So if you've got a question, go for it. Yeah, what is it?
Is there a difference with the type of brush you use to put the glue on?
To what, sorry?
Does it make a difference whichever brush you use to put the glue on?
Not really. Sometimes we use foam rollers, sometimes we use these wool ones. I personally like the foam ones better, but we were out of foam ones, so we've got wool ones. Does the same job. The whole idea is we're trying to put an even layer of glue over the entire job without any overly dry or wet spots. Now this one here is one of those split short grains. So what I'm doing here is I'm just getting it to fit back together like a jigsaw puzzle. And then it's a bit hard for you to see, but that joint where it's split, that's now completely disappeared. You can't actually see it unless you're deliberately looking for it. Once we roll the glue into it, it's as if that split was never there. And really, the glue is probably stronger than the natural lignin. Don't quote me on that. The natural glues that glue the fibres of timber together, so it's probably stronger than the original timber to start with. Now, really common stuff up students make is that when they put a split veneer together, they will stack the veneers on top of each other, and that creates a little air void either side. That makes a really, really, really weak point in your job, and it's very ugly on the side. Once you start shaping it, it looks really amateur and unprofessional. So please make sure you don't do that. Can I get a glue refill, please? Only a small one this time. So all the way to the edges. Over. Yeah, we'll see how we go. Okay, use this one. got to be really careful. I haven't got many layers left. If I push on the middle of the bench, I'm going to snap them in there, and that's not going to be good.
Yeah, you can touch the glue with your hands.
So, actually, never mind. Another little bit of a glue refill. Now, I only want little glue refills because I really want to limit how much is coming out of the bottle, because it's not good to put the used glue back in because it's going to be full of wood fibers like that, and it's going to contaminate that glue for someone else who does their job next. Okay, a little bit of a glue refill, please. Now, the other way you can put the glue on your job is that when you've got a glue in a squirt bottle, you can just squirt the glue on and then spread it around your roller. But the problem is, once it's on there, it's very difficult to get excess glue off. So that's why it's often better to use a tray. Now, at the end of this, you won't see in the video, but what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna clean these rollers out very, very, very thoroughly. Like very, very, very thoroughly. Until you can fill it up with water, squeeze the roller, and the water coming out is crystal clear. And then once you think it's clean, guess what? Clean it again. And then once you think it's clean, you're gonna clean it once more. If you leave a little bit of glue at all on those rollers, the rollers are stuffed. There's no saving them, okay? And it's just unnecessary to throw them away. Now, this is when our arms are starting to get tired. This is when students start getting a bit lazy and they stop running the glue all the way to the edge. And they stop with their attention to detail. Now, this is the last layer we're about to do. We're only going to glue these two sides. We do not glue the outside because that's obviously the outside of the skateboard, and we glue it to the job. Now, the bags are made of polyethylene and the glue does not stick to the polyethylene bag. So if there is a little bit of glue oozing out, that is fine. Okay. Now the process of vacuum bagging is a really cool process because we're actually using the atmosphere, like the pressure around us, to compress the job. So it doesn't feel like you're under pressure right now because you've been born and grown up under it, but there's 14.7 psi of pressure squishing down on us. If we can suck pressure out of that bag, that pressure does compress the bag. Okay, so last but not least, we've got glue. We're checking that it's all the way to the edges, all the way to the corners. Even if you're cutting the corner off, run the glue all the way. Now, if you do get glue on your shirt at all, you need to go to the sink and rinse it off very thoroughly. So I'll put my veneers down, I'll make sure my ends are lined up. We're good to go. Now, next step, I'm going to take my mold. I'm going to place my mold on my job. It's very important that I place my mold on square, okay? Some people, if they're rushing, they put it on a bit of an angle. I'm trying to do this. Very important, this mold is the mold skateboard is placed on square. Okay, I'll make sure it's parallel to edges and it's evenly spaced at the ends. If you put it off one way, you have too much material and a gap here, it does not work. So please make sure they're spaced evenly. Now, as I mentioned before, we've got our breather mesh which helps suck an even vacuum over the job. We have an elastic band Now, if you slide the elastic bands along the edge of the timber, it actually cuts the elastic bands. So you got to hold them out wide to get them on. So if I pull that up, that's going to be good. Excellent. So now this next step is a 2 or 3 person job. We need to hold this bag open like this. So can I get someone to hold that valve open? You're up. Can you help hold that open? Because I don't want to scratch the bag as it goes in, because it might put a splinter in and tear that bag. So I'm just going to very gently slide it in. Try not to get the... Okay, now before we even close it up, we're going to check. Is my skateboard still in the middle? Is it lined up at the ends? Yep, we're pretty good. Okay, so now, this is something students forget to do, and it ruins the glue. That might actually help if I pull the pump out. Thanks for looking after me. Appreciate Mr. Henderson. Double check it's lined up. Whew, busy, busy, busy. Now this paper protected the tape, so when I slid it in, I didn't drop splinters and dust and crap all over the tape. So now I peel the backing paper off. I'm going to fold it in half very neatly so it doesn't get ruined, and I place it inside the bag. When you debag your job after 24 hours, the first thing you do is you pull the paper out and you place the paper back on there. Owling's going to pull that. So he's going to pinch there, he's going to pull, and by pulling, it straightens out this joint. And then we're going to start in various locations and work that glue down. Now you can see if the glue has bonded, if there is no gap. So for example, it's black, 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 and there's a light grey bit air there. So air will get through there and our vacuum will be broken. So I'm going to work my thumbs along and I'm going to push the glue into the corners. There we go. Now the fun parts. Where you need muscles. So you can get vacuum pumps to do this job, or you can get these very cheap wine cooler pumps that will suck the air out. Now pre-COVID, some students would actually pop the valve off and suck the air out themselves to save about 5 minutes of pumping, but I don't want your cooties. Imagine pause it for a minute, I'm going to pump it for a while.
I think it'll just stop.
Huh? Oh, you can't pause it?
I think it's stop.
Huh? Okay, tag, someone's up. Go on. So when you're pumping, some people go, I'm going to pump like crazy, and they lift it up and then it doesn't actually do anything. So you got to keep sure it's down flat and pump. Go, go, go. So now, while we're doing this, we're making sure that a couple of people are pulling the bag so the bag does not get sucked in to the gaps between the deck and the mold. You can see now that the bag is now sucking onto the job. That's the atmospheric pressure outside the bag compressing that bag down. Okay, next one. Next person. Unless you got more. Yep, go. Quick, you're up, quick. Next person, go, go, go. Now you can see how the bag is now pulling the veneer up and conforming it to the shape of the skateboard, both in the top of the deck and the bottom. So as we're working, I'm pulling the bag. So, gotta keep it flat. There you go. Okay, so now to know if you're done, thank you sir, good job. To know if you're done, the last few pumps, just gotta be really quiet to listen to this. Where is it? There, hear that? Listen. Hear that clicking? That means you're at a maximum vacuum for that pump. I don't know what is in mercury, but that is the maximum vacuum. Now the really important thing, pump up till it clicks, walk away. You're going to come back in 1 to 2 minutes, and if this is a perfect seal in a bag, it's in good condition, no splits, the seal's done right, what should this do first pump? Good. I'll come back again another 5 minutes. Check it clicks again. I'll come back because this will be now the end of this will be pretty much lunchtime. You'll come back halfway through lunch. I'll organise with the teacher to get you in. Come give another pump. Come check it again. You come check at the end of lunch just before you go to pick your next class. Check it's right there. Okay? We need to make sure that's a perfect vacuum. Now, if it is not a perfect vacuum, we need to find our leak. Now, there's a few ways we can find a leak. One way is we can listen for it. If it's a large leak, you'll be able to hear the hissing. And then what we'll do is we'll get some of this leftover black goop, because we saved the old seals, and we find that split, maybe there's a little split at the edge, and we'll just put a little bit of goop there. And what will happen is the vacuum will try and pull the goop into the bag, and we'll seal it up fine. Another place you might have a leak is you might have a bit of a leak around that rubber seal there. You might have a split along here. Basically, you need to find that leak. Common leak as well is students who have not squashed this on properly, because see how it's black the whole way along? If you have a little grey line running through, the air will run in through there. So we'll keep checking, and we are good to go there. So that now can be left for 24 hours to set. A little bit of sunlight does not hurt, so what will happen is sometimes students will do this, make sure there's no vacuum leaks, they go sit outside on the curb, and that heat will help activate the glue. Woo. Go time. Now, like all good cooking shows, here's what I prepared earlier. Now this is terrible. This one sucks. The reason it's no good is they got glue on the outside veneers. It's very, very unsightly. There are parts of veneer that are not bonded because they didn't roll the glue all the way to the edge. Okay? So this is not a good one, but that's why I'm going to cut it all up. Now when we're working on our job, we've finished it, we pulled it out of the bag, we've gently rolled the bag up to, oh actually let's, leave that up. So here's another one I prepared earlier. So to debag, what I'm going to do is I'm going to very, very gently pull this apart. And then once I get a little bit apart, I've just got to use some muscles. And we work that open. Once we get it open, what's the first thing we put back on the seal? The paper. The paper goes back on the seal. I can then very gently remove my skateboard. The mold goes back in the cupboard, the mesh goes in the cupboard, the pump goes in the cupboard, we check the valve is back on there, and then once we're done, we get our bag, put the mesh back in the cupboard, and we very gently roll it so there is no corners or focus points for a split, okay? Plastic does degrade, we want to protect and love these bags. These bags with the pump, with the mesh is $240, they're not cheap. So we need to love and respect them. Okay, so next thing. We now need to start marking out our skateboard. When we pull it out of the bag, we do our best not to move the skateboard. We hold it exactly where it is, and if we do move it, we just wiggle the mold deck and it drops back into where it wants to sit, like it drops back into where it was. We then get our pencil with the mold on top, and we run our pencil around to mark out our deck. Keep in mind, if these were good, would they be at school? So what I do is I pull it out of the mold. This one's a little bit small. So I pull it out of the mold and find where it wants to sit. It feels natural there. I place this on and I mark my pencil line around there. So I'm going to cut that out. So to cut that out, we're going to come over here. Now we're going to clamp in a few different ways. One of the ways we're going to clamp is using these bench clamps here. These bench clamps bolt down onto the bench, lefty loosey, righty tighty. And then when we're clamping our job, we need some sacrificial timber. If we don't, and we just clamp using these clamps, it leaves big round bruises on our timber. It's really, really, really ugly. So it's very important that we have some sacrificial timber folded. Now, the other thing students stuff up is they put it up like this, clamp it down. Then you get big bruises from the bolts resting on the job, and that's not good either. So, if I'm going to cut this end and I have this here, I'm going to be working around that clamp. So that actually is quite difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my clamps over so I can have the job hanging off the end of the bench. Now you don't have to do these bolts up with a shifter or a spanner. Just finger tight is fine. It's just something with clamp as well. The other way you may need to clamp as you manipulate your job around is you may need to get some F clamps and F clamp onto the base of the bench underneath here. That's another way to do it. Someone thought that would clever. Okay, so you're just going to use an adjustable spanner or a shifter to undo this lefty loosey. Please use the right spanner if you've got it. Now, your skateboard is curved. The reason it's curved is so when we crisscross the grains, we make it strong. When we put our pop and our concave on it, those extra curves give us much, much, much more strength again. If we then bolt this down and squash those curves out, you'll actually snap the deck. So we are clamping down enough to make it safe with the jigsaw, but we're not doing it too much that it then bends the deck flat. So I'll put this across here. Clamping that, so I'm clamping it enough that it's not going to move, but it's not going to break. Okay? So now, I'm going to use a jigsaw. Now, when we're using a jigsaw, a couple of things. We have two options. We have a battery-operated jigsaw, and we have these corded ones. Battery ones are, I like battery ones because there's no cord to run over. If you don't have a battery one, you have a corded one, please tuck the cord up over your shoulder, so that way you do not run it over. You run it over, you've got 240 volt, you're going to get electrocuted, okay? You guys just jump over this time. Okay. So, when we're using the jigsaws are quite loud, so I'm going to make sure I have my hearing protection. We also have a reciprocating blade, so I'm going to need to make sure I put my eye protection on as well. Now, you're not going to be able to cut your entire job with one clamping position. You will clamp, cut a bit, move it, clamp, cut a bit, move it, clamp, cut a bit, move it. You're going to have to move your job about 7 or 8 times to get all your cuts done. Okay? Now, when we're using a jigsaw, a couple of things. We have the blade, we have the sole or the base, we have the trigger, we have also a speed function. You can drop the speed down depending on the materials you're cutting. And we also have a throttle or a trigger lock button. That way you don't have to hold the trigger. Can you please not use the trigger lock? Wait till you're a lot more confident with the machine, otherwise you might drop it and it will continue to run. There is also a blade bearing support. When we're cutting timber for curves, we put it on setting 2. When we're doing the straight parts, we put it on setting 3. It just preloads the blade to help it do its job. Couple little things. If you have a look at that, the blade is not square to the base plate. So what I do is I just undo this lock, line it up. Now I've lined it up with, there's a little tab on the inside lined up. If you're worried, you can get a square from the colour, place a square in there and double check that square, the blade is square. Cool, now when I'm using the jigsaw, this is a quarter one, so I get the cord up out of the way. I'm not strangling myself though. I'm going to go 2 hands on the jigsaw at all times. I'm going to keep my jigsaw flat on the job and move it around. Now that's a little bit difficult because the job's on an angle, so your jigsaw has to be on an angle so that the base is flat on it. We're going to place 2 hands on here, and the number one thing two things students stuff up. They put a blade against the job, then they pull the trigger, which ruins the motor. The other thing they do is they finish cutting and they lift it up while it's still running. That's an instant removal from the room for 5 minutes if you lift it up while it's still running. Okay? So, this edge, a little bit hard to see people at the back, but I start touching the edge of the line. So I've got our that angle. I cannot turn it that sharp at 90 degrees. I'm going to come in running parallel to the edge and gradually start removing that material, just like this. So get my cord out of the way. So I just want to stop cutting for a second. So I let go of the trigger and pulled about 1 millimeter back so it stopped cutting and it slowed down its own time. I then pull it out and I can do what I want to talk to you about. I didn't press hard then. There is no force required. I'm merely just guiding this. Like my little girl, she's 5, she uses the jigsaw with me. She's like more than strong enough to do it, and I just need a single finger on either side just to guide it for it. You do not need to force this. Very delicately, just let the tool go through. I'm working on the waist side of my line, and the edge of the blade is just touching that line as I work my way around. Not over the line, not on the line, on the waist side, and just kissing the edge of the line. Now I want to start to cut this halfway through. So I'm going to place the jigsaw back in there. I've moved it back a little bit from where it was cutting. I'm going to start it and then move into it. I don't want to start against the timber. It's called shock loading. It's not good for it. So I'm starting a little bit back, pull the trigger. Stop moving before I lift it up. Now you see as I got close to the edge, the piece I was cutting lip fell off and there's just that little lip there. To get rid of that, I'm just going to run the edge of the jigsaw blade along and finish that cut off, even though it's only the width of the blade that's coming off. As it stops moving. Common thing students do is they'll lift the jigsaw up flat like this and go, look sir, I've cut beautifully, I'm exactly on the waistline line touching my line. But because it's not flat on here, it cuts into the good material on the other side. You might be 5 millimeters in on the other side and going, oh, it's beautiful. The other side's ruined, okay? So that is the jigsaw. When I'm finished, I place the jigsaw facing the middle of the bench to protect that blade. If that gets bent, it's ruined. Now, in terms of shaping these ends, we have a few tools to do that, okay? To get into these little inside corners, if we try and use a plane for that, you can see there's a massive gap underneath. It just doesn't work. The plane does not fit. That's why we have this tool here. This is called a spoke shave, okay? You can get spoke shaves for cutting interior curves and external curves. You can get curved blades, all different types. This is just a standard straight spoke shave. Now I'm just going to check the blade. It should be, what you want to do is set it up so it doesn't cut, and then creep it in so it just takes the slightest shaving off. So the pieces that are coming off are just paper thin, very, very light. Now when I'm cutting, I'll start at 40, oh, actually we'll just draw a little drawing. Where's that? Oh, pen in the center. So if I'm looking at a section view of my skateboard, so I cut my skateboard, so I'm looking at, when I'm shaping the edges, I'll start off going 45 degrees. Then I might go 22 degrees there, 22 degrees there. Then I might split the difference and run a series of straight passes, and that's how I'm going to produce my curved edge. I'm not going to finish my curved edge with this. This is just a bulking tool, so I'm just getting rid of the bulk of my material. Then I'm going to finish it with the sandpaper. Sandpaper is when we get as smooth as baby's bottom. So I start at 45 degrees, and I'm just going to vary. Let's take my time. Now, the trick is, I'm looking at how far I'm going onto that top edge. I can see I've gone a little bit far onto that top edge here, and I haven't gone very far on the other part. So I'm not going to let my spoke shave touch this section again. Only the parts where I haven't gone far enough. That way I keep that curve nice and even. So that's how I get those interior curves. The external curves, and I put it down with the blade protected, I'm going to use the plane. The way we adjust how far the plane blade goes in is with this wheel here. We can also square it up with this lever at the back. Now, You'll see that when I'm planing along this edge, it works beautifully. It comes off amazing. When I go around here, it is very ugly. The reason being, if I go along this edge, I can pull a finger off easy. If I try and go this way, that's a bad explanation. How would I explain that? Because the grain is in this direction, when I run across it, it wants to tear pieces off. When I'm going along it, it just takes beautiful little shaves. So your end will be very ugly with the plane, so don't go too far. We finish it off with sandpaper. So just little... So hear that sound? It just sounds hairy. It just sounds nasty. It hurts me to do this. So that is still quite ugly. That is still quite ugly. I'm just removing the bulk of the material to save me several hours of sanding. That's now done enough. I then get my sandpaper and I'll sand that off. Now, I'm going to do the edges. So again, move my clamps around. Oh, almost done. So now, if I go straight, the back end of the sole of my plane hits here. So the trick is if you tilt the plane on an angle, it doesn't stick out as far and you can get closer into here and rest these edges. See how that just sounds nicer than before? Like that compared to... I get these beautiful little shavings that come off. So I'm varying the angle. Now I'm looking at it here. I'm quite deep in because you can see how I'm running along this edge here, but I'm a bit shallow here. So I'm going to come back and just focus on the bit that's a bit undone. Cool. Now just so I've done that the whole way around my skateboard, you think, yay, I'm done. No. Guess what? I'll do the other side. So you'll clamp it up. Very, very gently in a way that doesn't bruise the timber.
If we do that too tight, will it snap?
So I just got any plugs out to hear that question?
If we do our clamps too tight when it's going that way, will it snap? If
Definitely.
It's not glued?
Definitely snap. So same again, this time I don't necessarily have to use a spoke shaper around here, so I can use a blade. So working around here and shaping that until it's all rounded off. Once it's rounded off, we have a couple of options. We can wrap a piece of sandpaper around and round those edges off. We can also use a random orbital sander. So you'll notice as I'm working around, I'm varying my angles every time to ensure that it's nice and smooth and beautiful. And then once we're done, we obviously sand the rest of the deck. Now please make sure when you're sanding, especially your final sanding, you are sanding with the grain, not across. Because as soon as you sand across the grain, you've got to sand those scratches out. They're really ugly. Sanding with the grain, the scratches blend into the grain. You cannot see them. What have we got? Shaping edges, jigsaw, safety clamping. Ladies and gentlemen, we are done.